Therefore treat not the orphan with harshness, nor turn away the petitioner unheard, but the blessings of your Lord rehearse and proclaim. So the next time that we encounter hardship, grief, and we feel lonely and depressed, let us remember this surah that offered hope and reassurance to the greatest of all men. It offers the same hope and reassurance to us today, folks. At the end of every dark tunnel of despair is the reward of Allah, most gracious and most merciful. May Allah give us strength to endure hardship with patience and to emerge from all the trials and tribulations of this life with our iman renewed and our trust in Allah redoubled. As an American imam in a pluralistic and great nation, I call upon people of all faiths to work together to spread peace, tolerance, and understanding within our communities in this time of grief. And I promise you that today I will talk about marriage, that I will continue the subject that I picked up on last week. So I'm going to begin by talking about who should marry, because I think this is a great place to start. In a book called Reliance of the Traveler, which is a classical manual of Islamic jurisprudence, which I see I didn't finish here on the slide, it says that the legal basis for marriage prior to ijma', who knows what ijma' is? Ijma' is consensus of the scholars. So if we have information about something from the Quran, there's no question about it, right? If we have something from the Quran and it's elaborated in the Hadith, there's no question about it. But if an issue comes along that is not addressed specifically in the Quran, but may be alluded to in a Hadith, the scholars would take the information from whatever Quran might be addressing something similar and from the Hadith and come up with ijma', which is scholarly consensus. So prior to that, this was the information from Surah 4, An-Nisa, verse 3. If you fear that ye shall not be able to deal justly with the orphans, and I'm going to talk about, inshallah, twice, the tafsir of why the word orphan was used in this verse, and the meaning and the asbab an-nuzul, the occasion and reasons for revelation at that time. If you fear that ye shall not be able to deal justly with the orphans, marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. And I'm also going to talk about why at that time a verse came and said 2 or 3 or 4. So we want to clarify that, just in case some of our brothers start getting ideas that might get them in trouble, and they may find their cars sliced, and that they might find themselves walking home. But if you fear that you will not be able to deal justly with them, then only one, or a captain, that your right hand possesses.
Well, you will become a captain if you marry 2, 3, or 4.
That will be more suitable to prevent you from injustice. Now, we have one lawyer in the room and another young man who is going to be taking the bar soon, right? MashaAllah. So we notice here that there's a conditional clause in this verse of the Holy Quran, right? And the clause is about orphans. And it reminds us of the immediate promulgation of this particular verse. This verse was revealed after the Battle of Uhud, when the community was left with many orphans and widows and some captives of war. Now, let's talk a minute, because I'd like to make this didactic. Why do you think our attention is being called to orphans? Anybody? Yes, brother.
Their parents were killed.
Their parents could have been killed, and if their parents would have been killed, what would have happened?
They would become orphans and not have a home.
Right. Very good. You are so smart. Not only would they be orphans and not have a home, whatever their parents had would have been left to them, right?
I guess.
Inheritance. So, why do you think the verse is talking about deal with them justly? So I can have my eye on a little orphan over there and say, they inherited a lot of money when their parent died. So maybe I would have married them. And also, an orphan had half the rights at that time of a free person. So I could easily take advantage of them.
What do you call the woman if you pick her in battle?
Sorry?
If you're in the army, the people that you take, is that in the army?
I'm going to be addressing that later. That's called a captive.
The captive.
I'm going to talk about that too.
You're allowed to marry the woman,
You are allowed to marry the woman.
even though you have a wife at home?
No, hold on. I'm going to get there, okay? Bear with me. Let's talk about it phrase by phrase, because I've got a whole lot of slides to address each part, okay? Let's talk about the orphans first. So, just as Brendan said, there could be some issues of inheritance, right? Whereby a person could be taken advantage of. So let's say I'm a single young man, and there's an orphan in the community, and I know that that orphan is going to, when they become a major, in this country that would be 18 years of age, they're going to inherit a couple of million. Wouldn't that be a very attractive wife? Could be, right? To some people. The treatment of all was to be governed principles of the greatest humanity and equity. The occasion is past, but the principles remain. And we're going to get into greater detail, talk about what Don talked about and other principles as well as we talk about this. When we talk about fiqh minorities, we look specifically to a situation. After war, there were loads of women. And many men were killed. Many companions were killed. Now, what was better? To marry those women and treat them as your Muslim sister? To take care of them Islamically? Because men are the providers of women, because Allah has given them more strength than the other, and they maintain them for their means? Or for them to turn to prostitution in order to survive?
Married.
Thank you. So, you see, this was not an injunction that was revealed for some man that had an insatiable libido. I'm trying to be respectful because I respect the different age groups that we have in our class today. Everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
If you don't, raise your hand. Because I can find the words to explain it to you in a tactful and diplomatic way. Marry the orphans if you are quite sure that you will in that way protect their interests and their property with perfect justice to them and to your own dependents if you have any. Now, one of the reasons that Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was able to give his entire estate to Islam was because he had the blessing of his family. Umar gave half of his estate, radiallahu anh, to Islam. So you have to have the blessings of your dependents because Islam is a collective religion. So if I have some dependents, maybe they're the age of that orphan, Allahu Alam, and I say, well, I'm going to marry, I could have been a widower, I'm going to marry this young orphan. She has a huge farm, and I can raise a lot of camels there. and my children say, over my dead body, you don't have my blessing on that. Now my children, in this case, are children that pray, they fast, they serve the community, but they aren't happy about that. Do they have some rights on me? I am their shepherd. I am responsible for them emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally. The unrestricted number of wives of the time, and that's supposed to be up. I was working on this at 4:30 this morning or something. Ignorance was now strictly limited to a maximum of 4. How many wives did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam have when this verse was revealed?
13.
Very good. You get a gold star.
There's more than that.
So during this verse, it wasn't an abrogation because the Quran had not addressed this before, but it is a new ruling. You can now only have 4. Verse 6. Make trial of orphans until they reach the age of marriage, if you find sound judgment in them. And I want to talk about this a minute because a lot of people say that the age of marriage is the age of puberty. Girls are now reaching puberty around the age of 12 years of age, some at 11. Am I right, women?
Some younger.
Some of them even younger now. We don't know exactly why, but we know that people are reaching puberty younger. Now, I have a challenge as a therapist with this. Because I know that a woman's amygdala, her frontal lobe, is not developed till she's about 22 nowadays. And that's when she actually starts to be able to really process things. And guys don't get it till they're 25, and that's if they've never used drugs. So, when people tell me that they should be marrying their children at 12, I have a little bit of a problem with that. And that's my opinion, so I want to make sure you hear me loud and clear. Because I haven't met a 12-year-old yet that has sound judgment. As a matter of fact, I find a lot of 20-year-old guys, 21-year-old guys that don't have sound judgment when they get behind the steering wheel of a Mustang on I-4, because many of them think it's okay to drive 100 miles an hour. And I see some young brothers that I love very dearly shaking their head. As a matter of fact, not long ago, a woman said to me, "You know, I'm worried about my son. He's 25 years old and he still does backflips off the house." Now that to me doesn't sound like good judgment. Just share it.
Did they mature earlier in those years?
I was going to say that. I deem by law that in the agrarian societies, people mature earlier. And let me explain this to you. I grew up on a farm. At Fajr in the morning, I didn't know what Fajr was, but I knew that at dawn, as soon as there was enough light to see a crop, that I was supposed to be in sujood harvesting those vegetables. That's the agrarian society. I would harvest vegetables, and then when I was a junior in high school, I drove a school bus. I would not let my kid in the school bus of a junior in high school driving the bus today. So there is a difference. Farm kids are taught about responsibility. Agrarian kids. Anybody here know about what I'm talking about? Kathy? All right. It's a different lifestyle. You have to be responsible because the whole family is depending on you or you don't eat.
Child labor.
Yeah. I mean, people had children in those days, lots of them, to run the farm. And it was You learned about teamwork at home. So yes, people mature. And that's the point that I'm making here. We want to encourage our children to marry when they begin to have good judgment. Now some of you might say, well, I got some that are 40 and they still can't get married then. Well, then we got to work on that. We got to work on that. Okay. A man who needs to marry because of desire for sexual intercourse and has enough money for the bride's marriage payment, the mahar or dowry, for clothing for the season of the year in which he marries, and the expenditure of one day is recommended to do so in order to protect his religion, no matter whether he is occupied with religious devotion or not. I want to tell you where this comes from because I don't agree in the modern day with everything I'm saying. But what I want to teach you is what the scholars said. This came directly from a classical book of Islamic jurisprudence. Does everybody understand that? This is not the words of Imam Sa'd.
What was the age of the men then to get married? The legal age?
Well, most men at that time got married at puberty. And according to the,
Plan marriage?
it was, they got married whenever they had their first nocturnal emission. And girls got married when they had their first menses.
About 16?
Allahu Alam. I didn't live at that time, and that sounds sarcastic. I don't mean that. I don't know what time girls were having their menses in those years. I've heard that various things, 12, 14, I don't know. I think that what's important here is that we look at these principles and we ask ourselves, are we using these principles today? Are we looking at this for guidance and comparing this to our time and our conditions, looking at these principles? Or are we guided by hormones? And I think we have to ask ourselves that question honestly. And that's why I'm going to try to give you as much as I can. People kept coming to me and saying, "Imam, what about this in marriage? What about that in marriage? What about this in marriage?" And I said, you know what, there's so many questions about marriage, let me stop the tafsir for a while and go to marriage. Because I like to serve. And that's what I've been asked to serve up. Information about marriage. One who needs to marry but does not have enough to pay for these expenses is recommended not to marry, but rather to suppress the sexual desire by fasting. Now, if you fast on Monday and Thursday of every week, from dawn until sunset, and perhaps the middle 3 days of the month, which are the sunnah, inshallah, that would help you not have the strength to think about the other department. Everybody with me? Alhamdulillah. Unfortunately, I don't know how many people today have the level of iman that they will say, I'm going to fast because I can't afford to get married right now. And I'm a student working on my master's at UCF or Duke University or wherever. And I'm going to fast because I see these beautiful men and women on the campus, because I want to make sure that I make a caveat here. Whatever I say, if you see men, substitute woman in there, because it's all equal in Islam. Men, I was actually speaking to Eric today, and he asked me, why did the women pray in a separate place? And I said to him, well, some scholars would say that if the men looked at the women during worship, they would be distracted. And what I have learned is that women are just as equally distracted as men. When they see a guy up there that's real cute and he's got a tight jalabiyah on, they forget about subhanallah and alhamdulillah. Well, maybe alhamdulillah, I'm going to see if I can get up with that guy. He looks like good marriage material. He's got a beautiful photo on. So I want you to hear that loud and clear. That this is not, anything that I say is for both genders. Let me ask a question, if you don't mind, and this is of the men. How many of you today fast, if you don't mind me asking, and if it's embarrassing, I respect that. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. How many of you fast outside of the month of Ramadan? 1, 2, 3. MashaAllah. That's alhamdulillah. That's very good. I want to tell you that if you are young, I highly recommend fasting because it really will help you control yourself. If he does not devote himself to worship, being occupied with enjoyments and not thinking of worship at all, then marriage is better. Since someone whose lack of sexual desire is not due to a physical defect may later have such desire, as opposed to someone whose lack of desire is because of such a defect, to whom this will not happen. Now remember, this is coming straight from a fiqh book. Does everybody understand that? If you don't understand something I say, let's talk about it. This is the opportunity to have an open dialogue about marriage. So please, I want this class to be didactic. If I'm going to come to it later, I'll tell you, I am going to cover that later. Okay? And when I say as for a woman, it's because that's what the book that I quoted to you says. Alright? It's not because of the way I see it. So it says, as for a woman, if she needs to marry, it is recommended for her to do so. Though if she does not, in other words, she's not feeling any sexual desire within herself, and she is engaged in worship, then it is offensive for her to do so. Makruh. This is coming from the classic books. I cannot show you a specific verse, but I am going to give you some hadiths to spell out and help correct, understand whatever I've said. Because I don't see this specifically addressed. But this does come from a classic manual of Islamic jurisprudence. One of the reasons I'm sharing this with you is so that when you hear it in the community, you can say, well, I heard that before. And then you can challenge them and say, well, give me the verse of the Quran. Why does it say this when you're a scholar? But I have a lot of hadiths and verses that we're going to be looking at in this presentation. And we're going to be covering this for a couple of weeks for your benefit, inshallah. Though in that time such a woman needs a husband or unmarriageable relative to travel and so forth. Now, in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there were caravans. People traveled on camels through dark ravines, and it was not considered safe for a woman to travel by herself. So she had to have a mahram. And a mahram is a man who you are related to that you cannot marry. There are 14, and they are mentioned in Surah
24:31.
24, verse 31. You can look it up, and you'll know who they are. Now, many scholars today say that we do not have that same level of threat. And I'm not going to tell you the answer to that, because with terrorism and airport security and detainment and all kinds of things, I'm going to leave that up to you. Because we have to look at the situation that we're in at the time that we're in and look at the principles of all this and how we govern our lives. Most women, I believe today, can get on any domestic flight and fly anywhere in America, and they're going to be safe. You agree with me or not?
Yes.
Yeah. So, to say that you've got to have a mahram in a society where most mahrams are working to make a living, that would mean that women would be oppressed.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree.
And I respect that you don't agree. I don't expect you to agree with me. I'm simply putting out points out there that other people argue. Scholars argue. I'm not trying to get anyone here to agree with me. But I am trying to get you to think. I'm trying to get you to look at principles and to understand where the principles come from. Marriage is one of Allah's laws. Allah created our world and the laws that govern it.
We're off somewhere.
All right, let's fix that. Now we're on. Marriage is one of Allah's laws. Allah created our world and the laws that govern it. Among Allah's laws is that we need food to survive, air to breathe, rain for vegetation, and so on. There are some universal laws. The law of gravity says that if I drop this book, what's going to happen? It's going to go to the floor. So one of the laws of Allah is that He created things in pairs. Every single thing is created in pairs. It's amazing. It's amazing. How many people have a mango tree? Anybody? Did you know that if you don't have a male and a female mango tree, it will not produce mangoes? Anybody know that?
No.
When you see birds in a tree, most of the time, you just see one bird, most of the time. No. Even when you see the mother bird bringing a worm, she's feeding that baby. There's a pair there. Things are created in pairs, and from these pairs, reproduction takes place. So a huge principle in encouraging marriage is reproduction. In Athariyat, Surah 51 and verse 49, we have created things in pairs that perhaps you might reflect or that you might remember. In this context, this applies to human beings who are made of male-female pairs as well. Humankind started with our father Adam and our mother Hawa, Eve. From that pair, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created every single person in this room. In Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4 and verse 1. O people, revere your Lord who has created you from a single soul. Now this is an amazing verse, folks. Even though we know that according to the Quran, Adam was created first, the first human being, the scholars talk about the nature of this verse in Arabic because some people translate it a single cell. And they say that the reason this verse says a single soul or a single cell, it is that it is amplifying the gender equality of both the sexes. Created from it, its mate. Does it say man? Does it say woman? It says created from it, its mate. And if there's anybody here that would like to break it down in the Arabic, I welcome it. Because it talks about spouse. It talks about zawj, right? Does not specifically say man or female. And I got to tell you that when I was a Christian, before I became Muslim, and just for a few that might not know this, I was actually studying to be a Methodist minister and had a scholarship to Duke before I became Muslim. One of the things that always troubled me about my Christianity was the fact that women were made responsible for the original sin. If I had been a woman, that would not have been too attractive to me.
How did you get the egg? How did you create another soul from it?
Well, in the Christian tradition, it talks about taking a rib from Adam. But in the Islamic paradigm, although this is discussed, it seems to be a fabrication. All Allah had to do is say, "Be, I'm going to create a mate for Adam," and then there she was. Because that's how easy it is for Allah. And to me, before I was a Muslim, when I read this, I thought, wow, what a miracle. Here Allah created Adam without a man or a woman. And then He created Hawa without a man and a woman getting together. And everybody thought that it was such a big deal that He created Jesus from a woman. But I thought it was a bigger deal that He created a man from nothing. I thought that's really miraculous right there. Revere your Lord who has created you. Did I answer your question, Don?
I get the egg. You have to have in the Quran it speaks of inception, or I don't know where. It's written, I have an old Quran, and it said, which came first, the chicken or the egg, or the human or the egg?
Was this a footnote?
No, when Allah created, which, did He create the egg?
I don't know, and to my knowledge, in all of my years of study, I've never found anything like that in the Quran.
It just speaks of the seed.
But it talks about, am I saying it right, Brother Nutfa? He talks about a fluid, a disgusting fluid.
Okay,
Right.
that's a seed. That's
Which
the egg.
refers actually to the sperm.
Sperm.
Right. And in the Quran, it breaks down this whole process. But in my understanding, it does not say which came first.
But
In the Arabic.
No, what? To the group, it speaks of it, right?
It does speak of it, yes.
Not in detail, but mentions it.
Well, it actually speaks in quite detail. As a matter of fact, it's one of the miracles of the Quran because only in the last 100 years have doctors discovered what that verse actually said.
Not theoretically, but the sperm came first or the egg?
It does not say.
Okay.
It talks about fluids. Does not say.
The discussion is better than the message sometimes.
Yes. So, in Surah 49 and verse 13, we have created you from one male and one female, and have made you nations and tribes so as to know one another. The noblest among you in the sight of Allah is the most pious. Verily, Allah is all aware and all knowing. I said that backwards. So what I want to do is I will continue unless there's a discussion. I have said that every week I want to open the floor for any discussion or any sharing that you'd like to do.
We can do it off camera. That's more comfortable.
Yeah, so we can wrap it up with the camera. I love you all for the sake of Allah. But I want to create that space that you can answer questions or share anything you've learned today. Or discuss.